The average American home now costs 5 times what people earn in a year. That is nearly double what it was in the 90s. But now, it's time to be honest about this issue. This isn't an accident. This is by design. And I can prove it. There are 3 major reasons for the cost of housing absolutely exploding. Well, there are 3 reasons that I think we can address and fix pretty quickly, but then there's a 4th reason that we're going to need to flip some tables to fix. But I cannot wait to discuss it with you because we need more people to be aware of this. But first, before we dive into any of that, you are correct. Yes, it is true that construction costs have increased significantly due to inflation. Normal inflation rates have been shooting straight up, right? We all know this, we're all aware of this, but construction-related inflation has skyrocketed even faster. So this obviously makes it more expensive to build housing, which in turn makes the housing more expensive to purchase or to rent from the owner after it's built. But this only explains one part of the puzzle, because construction inflation still does not keep up with the price of housing. Right? That's how fast the price of housing has skyrocketed in recent years. So let's talk about the most obvious reason for our housing affordability crisis that still somehow goes right over everyone's head. When I was in high school, there was this hilarious guy named Dane, and he would carry an extra little cooler thing. I don't even know if it was a cooler or a bag purse. I don't really know. He would carry it into every single class. And in that cooler, he kept a stash of candy bars. Shout out Twix, by far my favorite candy bar, and now I'm actually really craving one. Not to get too off topic here, but what's yours? Okay, if it's not Twix, you're wrong. Okay, back to the point. Dane bought big bags of candy and would then bring a couple dozen of, the individual chocolate bars and whatnot to school and sell them for, I believe it was $1 each at the time. He would sell them to the other kids in the class. Dane was making a ton of money doing this because he was selling a single chocolate bar for $1 when he probably purchased a bag of 30 of them for like $5, right? We're 16 years old, 15 years old, I don't know, making a fortune at that time. But he was able to do this in school because there was a limited amount of candy. If he was only selling the candy bars for, let's say, 10 cents each, he'd sell out within the first 5 minutes of the first fight before the first period, right? I mean, he would sell out immediately like that. Now, also, when you go into a candy shop and there's candy everywhere, they can't really just hike the price on you because you're like, well, I can just go right across the street to that candy shop or, to that gas station. There's candy everywhere. But in school, there was a very limited amount of candy. And because of this, he was able to sell them off for $1 each and pay for all of his gas money every single week with that money. Shout out Dane, brother. I hope you are doing well. He joined the Air Force or something. Hope you're doing well. When you look at housing in America, we are in a deficit of millions of homes right now. Millions, okay? I believe the data from last year said that we had roughly 4 million too few of homes to meet the demand. That's an enormous number. Dane had about 30 candy bars to sell every single day, and we had about 3,000 people at our high school, probably a bit closer to 2,000 once you subtract everyone that skipped, but either way, that's what allowed Dane to sell chocolate bars worth 5 cents for $1 each. When you have millions of people looking for housing over here in the States, but not enough housing to go around, guess what happens to the price? Just shoots up. That is economics 101, supply and demand. And we just simply do not have enough supply of housing here in the United States. But what has caused this enormous housing deficit? This is where we start to dig up the bodies. Imagine if you had purchased a home, let's say 30 years ago. Actually, no. Let's make this more recent. Imagine if you purchased a home 4 years ago. You found a nice little starter home. Looked like the perfect place to settle down with your wife and have your first child. It's a safe neighborhood, there's a decent school nearby, and there aren't any pedos living in the area. Is that something that people check for before they move to a neighborhood? I don't own a home. I live in downtown Nashville, so that's not something I've ever looked for before, but let me know if that is actually something that y'all check for before purchasing a home. Okay, back on point again. Well, now imagine this. Your wife is pregnant again. Congratulations. Oh my God, now there's going to be 4 of y'all living in this little starter home. Wait, that means you don't have enough room. You need to upgrade, get a bigger home, maybe even closer to your parents so you can have some nearby babysitters when y'all want to go out. Maybe a strange crackhead has been walking around the neighborhood a bit too much. Whatever the reason is, you've decided you need a new place. But now you've just realized something. You're stuck. Yeah, you are stuck. You were smart enough and prepared enough to purchase a home 4 years ago. But because of that, you and all the other homeowners that made that same decision are now faced with a very pleasant predicament. The interest rate on your current mortgage is 2.65%. If you were to take out a new loan for a new home, that interest rate would be over 6% now. You can't afford that. Hell, who can afford that? Even if you could, why would you want to pay double the interest rate on your mortgage? Now, this little predicament creates something that we call the lock-in effect, meaning you're locked in. You aren't upgrading, you aren't downsizing, you aren't moving across the street, you're not going anywhere. You're staying exactly where you are, which is having an enormous impact on the supply of starter homes, especially in this country. Damn, honestly, shout out to all y'all that bought homes, back before the pandemic hit or right after it hit. Y'all were a lot smarter than me. But this is all a simple fix, right? We need more housing. Why not just build more housing? Seems simple enough. Why aren't we doing that? Sure, it may be a bit more expensive now due to inflation, but it sounds like we clearly need more housing. So build it, okay? Let's say I agree with you there. But where? I want you to think of a dangerous, run-down city for a second. Let's think of a city together. Okay, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so let's just use that as an example here, okay? Downtown Louisville is ghetto as hell. It's hella dangerous. I've been jumped, robbed, beat up just for fun down there, literally at least more than 20 times. Now, my ex-girlfriend who I was dating several years ago lived with her mom about 20 minutes outside of downtown in this new, what was then an up-and-coming area of the city. And that area was considered really nice. Everyone was driving a nice little Mercedes. They just built a Target nearby. They got some nice restaurants starting to pop up in the area. And then bam, her mom's neighborhood was just informed some new housing was about to be built right down the street. A dense housing unit to house dozens and dozens of people. And not only that, but this was going to be a housing area built for low-income people. People that necessarily couldn't afford to buy a place out there in that bougie up-and-coming area. Now, this was being done because our downtown had simply grown far too overpopulated. And this area that my ex and her mom lived, well, this area was up and coming. Tons of jobs popping up, all around the place down there or up there. Tons of parks. But still, because it was still up and coming, because it was still 20 minutes away from downtown, there was still tons of land to build on. And when you're looking to build more housing units, you need land to build it on. It's a big part of it. Well, her community said, piss off. I spent a fortune buying this house to get far away from all that, and you ain't building a high-density housing unit anywhere near us. Someone in the community, or a lot of someones in the community, put some pressure on the local politicians, and boom, that was that. Done deal. That housing unit was no longer being built. Just like that. Gone. And look, I don't necessarily blame the people for having this, I believe they call, NIMBYism? Not in my backyard mentality. Look, if I worked hard for years, sometimes decades, finally got enough money to buy a nice home in a safe area, far away from that area where I had my ass beat 20 times. Are you allowed to say that on YouTube? Bleep that out, please. Point is, if I was able to afford that place and I, worked my ass off to get there, and then I was told they were going to bring that area that I tried so hard to escape all the way out to my neighborhood, I would be pissed too. But because of this, local zoning laws very often restrict the construction of anything other than single-family homes. And look, I don't really I don't really blame the people for putting a stop to that. I get it. But the research suggests that these policies have prevented millions of additional homes from being built over the years. It's making a substantial difference in the amount of housing we have available here in the United States. Now, here's the part we need to start flipping tables over. And I'm dead serious about this. This pisses me off so much. Remember earlier how we discussed how a limited housing supply, supply and demand, was a major reason for driving up the cost of homes? Well, and this part should piss you off just as much as it pisses me off. What if I told you that a lot of single-family homes weren't even being purchased by individuals looking to live in that home? What if I told you that giant corporate investors were buying up single-family homes all across this country? Think about that for a second. Would that piss you off? Well, it's true. And not only does this drive up the cost to purchase a home because we are all competing against these giant corporations and investment firms that have unlimited money to spend, but they are also driving up the cost to rent these homes because they can. There are some, mom and pop companies that own a few homes in local areas and rent them out, and you should be aware of that, but they tend to prioritize tenant retention over profit, over price hikes. Let's put it that way, okay? Whereas companies, all the way up there in New York, purchase homes, all the way down in Texas, and then they just hike up the rent because they can. Now, I know. Roughly speaking, these corporate investors only own about 1% of single-family homes nationwide. And that's important for you to know because if anyone ever tries to debate you on this, they're going to bring up that fact. But they concentrate their assets to metropolitan areas. And so what does that mean? This means that in those areas, metropolitan areas, cities, in a lot of the major cities across this country, especially in the South, these giant corporate investors play a huge role in determining the cost of housing. For example, let's look at Atlanta. Over 25% of single-family rentals are owned by corporate investors. That means 1 out of every 4 single-family homes in Atlanta that you can rent and live in is owned by some enormous entity miles away from you, okay? That's crazy. Over the last 15 years in Atlanta, large companies account for over 30%, 30% of all single-family homes purchased. That is, I don't even have words for that. Can you imagine that? 10 houses for sale, 3 of them get purchased by large companies. But guess what? That's not only affecting those 3 homes, that drives up the cost of all the homes being purchased because you are competing against those giant corporate investors. You're not just competing against your neighbor for these homes. So bam, that is making the cost to purchase a home so much more expensive. And then also, obviously, if corporate investors own 25% of all single-family homes being rented out in a city, do you not think that they are having a major influence over what the cost is to rent a single-family home in that area? Like I said, a lot of smaller mom and pop investment companies that own, 2 or 3 single-family homes in their local area, they prioritize tenant retention, whereas these giant corporations prioritize just hiking the price. And they don't live in those areas, so they don't necessarily, see what the cost is or the vibes of the area. They just have software that run numbers and then decide, oh, this is what the rent should be every single month for all these homes. The residents living in Atlanta that are having to rent these houses from these large corporate investors are nothing but a number. There is no face to the people living in their homes, no nothing other than a number. So yes, we need to address overall inflation. Yes, we need to have serious conversations about zoning laws and regulations. But this, corporate investors purchasing over a quarter of all single-family homes in cities across the country, this needs to be made illegal immediately. And if you're a giant company that owns a bunch of these homes, you should be forced to sell them sell all of them over the next decade or so. I'm serious. And I'm not anti-free market. I am free market, but a free market in Atlanta should not be heavily affected by a corporation states and states and states away. I mean, let's be real. Do you really think that all of these single family homes would just go unpurchased forever in Atlanta if these greedy investors just stopped buying all of them? No. They'll be purchased by people that want to live in them, or at least by someone local to the area that cares at least a little pinch more than the private equity firms states away in New York City, like Blackstone. A lot of people think about BlackRock regarding this issue, but it's actually Blackstone who's the real issue here. And do not let the super free market people fool you regarding this, okay? This is a real issue that needs our attention and needs to be addressed. So yeah, let's figure out our inflation issues, especially related to construction. That means looking into supply chain vulnerabilities and hope that these tariffs don't last forever, because yes, the tariffs are affecting this as well right now. Let's maybe reconsider deporting hardworking men and women working in our construction industry, because the lack of labor is causing construction prices to be higher as well. Let's deregulate construction. Let's have serious discussions regarding zoning laws and realize that we need to build more homes within the free market, by the way, not developed by the government. And then let's put freaking leashes on these giant, greedy, country-ruining corporations. Yeah. That's a start. Thank you for watching. I'm Lou Hawley. Subscribe and join the community, please. It would mean a lot, and I promise you I'm not always this angry. I am often, but not always. Anyways, hope you have a great day.